Unmute. Do not disturb and all the things. Do not disturb. Perfect. Hey, good people. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here this morning. I'm honored by that because time is a non-renewable resource, right? We only get so much of it. We don't know how much. And to offer somebody your time and attention for a little while is a really beautiful thing. I don't take it lightly. Thank you. I'm wondering if do I need to be a little bit louder? That's what I was thinking. Check and test and check it. 1, 2, 1, 2. There it is. Thank you. Yeah, so I want to welcome you. I want to take a minute to actually welcome you with some intention. I think pretty much every speaker you've ever heard in your life starts off by saying, welcome. And then they go right on. And I don't know about you, but I've been in some rooms. Maybe we should back that down just a little bit on the edge of it. I've been in some rooms where people started out saying, what is it?
270 hertz is the
David Wilcox is in the house. He says the ring is at 270 hertz. That's and he's not kidding. He knows that. So he's a friend of mine. It's totally true. Yeah, he's one of those people who walks into a room and the fluorescent lights are humming. He's like, B flat. Yeah. Anyway, honored that you're here. I do want to welcome you into this space because I've been asked to hold the boundaries of this room for just a little while. And I think it's good to know where the boundaries are because as I was starting to say before I interrupted myself, I've been in some rooms where people said, welcome. And I wasn't sure I was actually welcome. People treat the word lightly sometimes, right? So I want you to know where the edges are of that welcome. So I want to welcome you this morning if you're feeling weary. Thank you for showing up anyway. I want to welcome you if you're feeling energized. Thank you for bringing that into the room. I want to welcome you if neither of those things covers it, or maybe a bit of each. I want to welcome you if you consider yourself a woman. I want to welcome the women into the room. Thank you. I want to welcome the men into the room. I want to welcome you if neither of those words is big enough to hold all of who you are. Welcome. I want to welcome you no matter the color or the texture of your skin. I want to welcome you if you think of yourself as young or you no longer think of yourself as young. I want to welcome you no matter what body your soul was born into. I want to welcome you if you're feeling somewhat hopeful or somewhat despairing, or a bit of each. I want to welcome you no matter who you love. I even want to welcome you no matter who you vote for. You don't hear people say that very often these days. I want to welcome you if you're deeply committed to nonviolence and really knowledgeable about this. I want to welcome you if that's fairly new to you. Welcome. Regardless of your faith or belief system, regardless of whether this is a very comfortable place for you or a rather uncomfortable place for you, thank you for being here. You get it, right? In my own lens, I would say if you're a child of God, you're welcome here. And spoiler, you're a child of God. Right? So thank you for being here and please be welcome. And by the way, when we say that all are welcome, we mean that. All people are welcome. That doesn't mean all behavior is welcome, right? It's an important distinction. So if folks do harm to others in the room, we're going to need to address that and set some boundaries, right? But all people are welcome here and invited into this space. So this whole gathering is about transformative storytelling. And I just love that phrase that Brian and Gareth have given so much of their lives to in recent years. It really touches a lot of things I believe as well. I think these stories really matter. How we tell them and how we hear them really matter. Oh, we should click. I have to say click out loud because my clicker wasn't working. So, I'm gonna suggest that stories matter. And I think we can stipulate that. I don't have to argue with you about that. You're here, you understand that stories matter. But I just want to spell out exactly why I think they matter. Because I think we understand the world in terms of story. A pile of data doesn't have meaning until you interpret the data, right? And that's a story. What is this data trying to tell me? It's trying to tell me some kind of story, right? So I think everything about our understanding of the world is rooted in story. And when I use the word story, I'm speaking really broadly. A photograph can tell a story. A painting can tell a story. In fact, let's look at a couple. Oh, actually, I need to finish this first. Sorry, I get distracted. So click once more there. So I want to suggest that some stories are so deep in us that they guide our actions, even if it's a story we've never thought about, right? We've soaked in it our whole lives, and it can influence us even if we've never really examined it, right? And it gets weirder than that. Click again. Some stories are so deep within us that they guide our actions once more. One more click. Even when we know they are false. Right? There are stories that I've given a lot of my life to combating. Doesn't mean I'm free of those stories, right? Racism is a story like that. Sexism is a story like that. One occurred to me just within the last year. I thought, wow, I've been hearing this and probably saying it my whole life, and I don't believe this at all. How about the phrase, what goes around comes around? Well, what goes around comes around, right? That's a way of saying people get what they deserve, which is a lovely story if your life is working out pretty well, right? But it's not been my life experience that people get what they deserve. I know people who are so noble and kind and work so hard and have such a hard road. I'm getting choked up just thinking about one of those people in particular, right? People don't get what they deserve in my experience. That just hasn't been my lived story. So I'm trying to reject that one. But it's really easy when you see somebody getting what you think they deserve, as though we get to decide what other people deserve, it strengthens that story, right? Well, what goes around comes around. I don't believe that. There's so many cultural narratives like that that we soak in and they soak into us, whether we like it or not. I was on a train. If you click once more, Amy Kim, thank you. I was on the plane train in the Atlanta airport last weekend, just on Sunday. And I was talking with somebody beside me, and I looked down and I saw that. It's not a particularly artful picture, but I thought, oh my goodness, what is the story to this crumpled rose stem and petals on the floor of the plane train? Tells a bit of a story, right? And sometimes it's evocative. You can tell your own story in there. Go to the next one, please. Sculpture can tell a very powerful story with no words at all, right? That's in Birmingham. And I want to give credit to that one. That's Kwame Okoto Bamfo at the Freedom Monument in Montgomery. Go to the next one, please. There's a classic, right? And it tells so much story. You could spend so much time with that painting, just studying who might be saying what to whom and what the dynamics of those relationships are. I find that quite interesting. All the forms that stories take. One more click there. I love that far side. If you can't read the bottom of it, it says, in the days before television. Right, not a rhetorical question. What are some of the ways that we hold stories and transmit stories in our culture? What do you got? Jokes hold story, yeah. Can hold big capital story, right? Can hold meta narratives about how the world works. What else? Songs, yeah. Movies, yeah, you bet. can't fail to mention movies as a thing that Gareth has something to do with. Picture books, yeah. Literature. TikTok, right, social media writ large, absolutely. There are so many ways that we transmit these stories. So this Porch community is rooted in the idea of telling a better story. And I think how we understand story, the meta narratives, really influences not only how we tell stories, but how we hear them. And here's the thing, if we understand the world through story, and we behave in the world according to how we understand the world, and our behavior in the world has impact, I think those are all true statements, then telling a better story literally can change the world, right? In the most literal sense. One of the things I've learned from this community in the last few years is that a story can't be removed. You can't really take a story out and leave a gap there. You can only replace a story with a better story. You can write over it, but you can't really erase it. And I think that's a powerful insight too, because I think I've spent a lot of time combating stories that I think are wrong, rather than trying to tell a better story. And yes, sometimes you need a demolition crew before you can build a house, right? Sometimes you do need to combat toxic stories, but you can't stop there.
Yeah.
Because something else flows into that vacuum. Let's click to the next slide here. I would say that it's safe to say that nonviolence is not the dominant narrative in the United States right now, right? If we are to tell a better story, we've got a little bit of work to do. Standing firmly in defense of humans and values that we love while simultaneously refusing to dehumanize other people, even if they are dehumanizers, that's not the dominant narrative. So if we're trying to make a case for that kind of approach to the world, we're going to need some powerful stories. And we're going to need to be intentional about how we tell them and what we amplify. Many years ago, back in 2007, it's hard to believe that's 18 years ago, 2007, a friend of mine sent me a clip from a local newspaper in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it told a true story of something that had just happened a few days before in Knoxville. This happened on May 26th, 2007 in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was so struck by that story that I wrote it into a rhyme. And actually, Carl, would you look in that laptop bag back there? I've got a copy of the book that I'd kind of like to hold up and read, just like an elementary school teacher. I started sharing this poem that I'd written in concert between songs, and I started watching how people were reacting to it. So I finally decided that what I needed to do, thank you, sir, was get an illustrator and make a kid's book. And like all of my favorite kids' book, this is kind of a kid's book for adults. So I want to tell you this story. There's a video. We can go ahead and click through to the next page. Great. Go ahead and click that. It'll be big enough for you to see up there. Oh, we went right to the next thing. Don't click it again once you start this video. Go back there. Hopefully we got that. If not, I'll just go full elementary school. Click that once more. All right, now it should be good. The day was bright and sunny, as most May days tend to be in the hills of Appalachia, down in Knoxville, Tennessee. A dozen men put on their suits and quickly took their places in white robes and those tall and pointed hoods that hid their faces. Their feet fell down in rhythm as they started their parade. They raised their fists into the air, they bellowed and they brayed. They loved to stir the people up. They loved when they were taunted. They didn't mind the anger. It's exactly what they wanted. And as they came around the corner, sure enough, the people roared, but they couldn't quite believe their ears. It seemed to be support. Had Knoxville finally seen the light? Were people coming round? The men thought for a moment they found their kind of town. But then they turned their eyes to where the cheering had its source, and as one, their shoulders crumpled when they saw the mighty force, because the crowd had painted faces, and some had tacky clothes, their hair and hats outrageous. Each had a bright red nose. Now the clowns had come in numbers to enjoy the grand parade, and they laughed and danced that other clowns had come to town that day. And then the marchers shouted, and the clowns all strained to hear, each one tuned in intently, with a hand cupped to an ear. White power, screamed the marchers, and they raised their fisted hands. The clowns leaned in and listened like they couldn't understand. And then one held up his finger and helped all the others see the point of all this yelling, and they joined right in with glee. White flowers, the clown shouted. Excuse me, white flour, the clown shouted, and they reached inside their clothes. They pulled out bags and tore them, and huge clouds of powder rose. They poured it on each other, and they threw it in the air. It got all over baggy clothes and multicolored hair. Now, all but just a few of them were joining in the jokes. You can almost see the marchers turning red beneath white cloaks. They wanted to look scary. They wanted to look tough. One rushed right at the clowns in rage and was hauled away in cuffs. But the others chanted louder, marching on around the bend. The clowns all marched on too, of course, supporting their new friends. White power, came the marchers' cry. They were not amused. The clowns grew still and thoughtful. Well, perhaps they'd been confused. They huddled and consulted, this bright and silly crowd. They listened quite intently. Then one said, I've got it now. White flowers, screamed the happy clown. And all the rest joined in. The air was filled with flowers, and they laughed and danced again. Everyone loves flowers, and white's a pretty sort. I can't think of a better cause for people to support. Green flower stems went flying like small arrows from bad archers, and white petals covered everything, including the mad marchers. And then a very tall clown called the others to attention. He choked down all his chuckles and said, friends, I have to mention that what with all the mirth and fun, it's sort of hard to hear. But now I know the cause that these paraders hold so dear. Tight showers, the clown blurted, and he hit his head in wonder. He held up a camp shower, and the others all got under. Or at least they tried to get beneath. They strained, but couldn't quite. There wasn't room for all of them. They pushed, but it was... That's right. White power, came the mad refrain, quite carefully pronounced. The clowns consulted once again. Then a woman clown announced, I've got it. I'm embarrassed that it took so long to see. But what these marchers march for is a cause quite dear to me. Wife power, she exclaimed, and all the other clowns joined in. They shook their heads and laughed at how erroneous they'd been. The women clowns were hoisted up on shoulders of the others. Some pulled on wedding dresses, chanting, here's to wives and mothers. Now the men in robes were sullen. They knew they'd been defeated, so they yelled a few more times, and then they finally retreated. And when they'd gone, a kind policeman turned to all the clowns and offered them an escort through the center of the town. The day was bright and sunny, as most May days tend to be in the hills of Appalachia, down in Knoxville, Tennessee. People joined the new parade. The crowd stretched out for miles. The clowns passed out more flowers and made everybody smile. And what would be the lesson of this shiny southern day? Can we understand the message that the clowns sought to convey? It seems that when you're fighting hatred, hatred's not the thing to use. So here's to those who march on in their big red floppy shoes. These are actual photographs from that day. It's a true story. It's based on a true story. I took a couple of liberties in the book, and I outlined very clearly the liberties that I had taken on the inside back cover, because facts matter, right? Facts are a part of truth. So I want to think about this for just a minute through the lens of Walter Wink's work. Walter Wink, I imagine many of you are familiar with, really brilliant nonviolence theorist and philosopher and theologian. Walter Wink talked a lot about third way responses. So our most natural inclinations when we feel threatened, when there's aggression, are fight and flight. And when the Klan is coming to your town to have a march, you've got to decide what to do if you want to stand in opposition to that idea, the ideas that they're espousing. So there's fight. And that's perhaps the most common one where, well, we'll show them, we'll take 1,000 people for their 25 and we'll surround them and we'll shout them down. Okay. But doesn't that kind of give them what they wanted? Right? They wanted the attention. They wanted to stir people's anger. They wanted to stir division within the community. Kind of worked, right? And then there's flight. People say, well, all they want is attention, so just stay home. Well, okay, but not everybody's going to stay home unless you very carefully organize a complete blackout. Now, that's been done really beautifully. In Davidson, North Carolina, in the 80s, there was a Klan rally down there. There was an announcement that some Klan guys were going to march through their town square. Their town square is like this big in Davidson. And they were going to form up and march from one side of the square to the other side of the square. So local students and other activists actually went to every shop on the town square and said, let's close for the day and have nobody here at all. Let's empty the town square. Let's get the word all over town that nobody's going downtown that day. And they did that so effectively that the Klan actually, they hid some cameras in trees, and one guy was up in a window just kind of looking down, but not being seen. And what happened was that these dozen guys got together on one side of the square and they put their suits on and they shouted a couple things and then they marched across the square, but literally they're looking around and nobody's there at all. And he said they didn't even make it across the square before they just gave up and went home. They were just so dispirited. There was nobody there, right? So that's important. That's impressive, a freeze out. But that's different from saying, let's have no response. Because some people are always going to go down there. And then that message stands unopposed. And that's not what I want either, right? So these brilliant people, mostly from a group called Mountain Justice in Knoxville, Tennessee, pretty radical environmental folks, live out in the woods. They heard this was going to happen and they said, okay, what are we going to do? And they had among them a guy who was really skilled in street theater. And they laid all this out. They brought all the props with them. You can see they had wedding dresses and kazoos and all kinds of things. And then they started responding to this Klan rally. You can see the rally across the bottom there on the other side of the street with the police, of course, protecting the Klansmen, the neo-Nazis over there. So this was not something that they came up with in the spur of the moment, right? They were strategic. They did a lot of planning. They did a lot of rehearsal, in fact. And what happened in this particular case was that these neo-Nazis had reserved the town square for 4 hours and they left an hour and a half early because they had no idea how to respond to this. They were there spewing this vitriol and hatred, and these folks came and made everybody smile, right? They handed out flowers. They made people laugh. And there's nothing like laughter to just dissolve that kind of vitriol. It's not just creative and fun, it's also effective, right? Third way responses are generally not what come naturally to us. They take a lot of intention, a lot of creativity, but they work better. I also love, next slide, the Raging Grannies. Sorry for the quality of that lowest photo there. I've been around the Raging Grannies at lots of different events over the years, and I just love that they bring what they've got, right? They dress in their frumpiest muumuus and go full old lady with flowery hats and, lean right into all the stereotype things, right? What's that? Oh, yeah, you got the perfect hat. Okay, you're ready to roll. That's perfect. Yeah, so when you've got all that stuff, or you can find it at the thrift store or whatever, and you lean into this role, the thing is, people don't expect to see older women at protests. They expect it to be a lot of angry youth. And when these older women leaning completely into the stereotypes show up and they sing songs together, you know what? They always make the news. every single time, right? Every protest I've ever been at, there might be some articulate point being made over here, but the raging grannies are gonna rock it, right? Because they're bringing what they bring, and you can see, they're getting their message across, right? These women have the story that they want to tell right there. And what they do is they take old traditional songs like Row, Row, Row Your Boat or Mary Had a Little Lamb, and they write new lyrics to them about the issue that they're advocating for. It's really wise to do, one more slide there. To do an asset inventory and see what you've got to work with, right? Click it once more, Amy Kim, please. My wife taught me a really cool way to do this asset inventory that's based on somebody else's work, but she added one more. So one way to check your assets is to say, what are the gifts of the head? What are the things that I actually know something about? Next is, what are the gifts of the heart? What are the things that I'm really passionate about? Because you're gonna stay in the game later. If this issue has touched your life directly, then that's an issue of the heart for you. What are the things you can do with your hands? And really list them. Like, I make great pastrami sandwiches, or I know how to fix bicycles, or I can play guitar, right? Whatever those things are that you can do with your hands, just write them down. I've seen cookies used really, really well at protests. It's amazing. They took them to the governor. That's a longer story. I'll skip that one. And then gifts of the hive is communities that you're connected to. I was just talking to my friend Chris, who's connected to Rotary as well as connected to this community. And that's one, right? Your faith community is one. Maybe just a friend group is a community that you're tied to. So there are lots of communities you're tied to. List them out. Because often you can invite those folks into the work that you're doing. This is not the topic for today, but the main thing that I speak to people about when I'm speaking about things, when I'm invited to hold space with folks for a little while, is the danger of hero narratives, where you do it by yourself, as opposed to movement narratives, which are actually always, in my study of history, I know I'm making a bold claim here, always what changes large-scale issues, right? I can't find any example in history of a hero doing something dramatic in a moment of crisis and effectively addressing a large-scale problem in the absence of a movement. And yet, it's how we tell the story. It's our dominant narrative of social change that you got to be ready for the moment, and when the moment comes, right? So already that's reactive. It's not proactive. You got to be ready for the moment, and when the moment comes, rise up and summon all your courage and strength and wisdom and do the right thing, and you'll change the world. So step one is wait for the moment. Step two is probably wait some more, because most of us can't see ourselves as that hero. And mostly in the story, that's what we do. The problem arises and then the hero shows up. So wait for the moment, then wait for the hero, and then wait for the hero to fix it. And then you have a role. Step four is to clap. Celebrate the hero. I truly believe that's our dominant narrative of change, of social change, right? So your instructions are wait, 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 clap. That's how you change the world. I don't think that's working out very well, right? So I would like to offer instead that I think a better way at changing the world is first, find your people, figure out what you're going to work on. You care about a lot of things, but pick one, right? Pick something that you're going to work on that's pulling on your heart right now. Two, find your people. Where are the folks who care about the thing that you care about? They're probably already gathering and working on this. You can just show up. You don't have to start a new nonprofit, right? Or if you can't find them, get some friends together for coffee. It's that easy, right? Get some friends together for coffee to say, hey, I care about this. Do you care about this? Is there energy in this group to work on it? If there is, when can we start meeting? And who's going to keep minutes, you know? And get that together. Make some plans, figure out what you care about, figure out what's one small, effective, but short-term goal. Who's gonna do what, when you're gonna meet again. Y'all, it's hard news to bring to people, but the truth is, it is committees that change the world. It really is. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but it's true. So click to the next one then, please. I want to ask y'all a very specific question. When you see that word right there, what are the first images that come to your mind? Not necessarily the best ones, but what are the first images that come to your mind? Marchers, shouting. What else?
Anger.
Anger. Risk taking? Is that what you said? Yeah, okay. Great. Civil disobedience, yeah. Y'all draw me a picture. What is draw me a picture of civil disobedience, my dear friend. Like, what do you see when you picture civil disobedience? Okay, Moral Monday. And what does that look like? Give me a picture.
So, sitting in the Capitol, sitting in the legislature. So.
Yeah, okay, so people gathered en masse in the rotunda of the Capitol building or the legislature, singing, chanting, praying until the police tell them to go and then not going and then getting arrested. Yeah. Right. So click a couple more times. That one, maybe two more, well, once more. Right. I'm going to suggest that this is our cultural narrative of what it looks like to be an activist. Sometimes I'm all for marching in the street. In fact, I did it last night. I went to Chuck Edwards Town Hall in Asheville and we had a big time. And I was the only person that brought a drum. So I was planning to just pop in really briefly and then zip over to the White Horse, but I was the only person with a drum. So I ended up there leading chants for a really long time. So these things happen, but I'm all for marching in the street with signs when it's time to do that. But I want to be super clear that when we're talking about activism, that's not all that we're talking about. That's one form of activism. For one thing, it's protest. And protest is only half of activism, right? Standing in the way of what you believe is wrong is important. But again, that's the demolition crew. It doesn't actually build anything, right? So the other half is coming up with alternative systems. Right? Mutual care actions are one part of creating a better way. We had a little gathering Wednesday night, a little pre-conference for this conference. And Gareth was talking about prefigurative movements. That's a word that I had not encountered until just about 3 years ago when I was doing some research for a book I wrote. And prefigurative movements are movements that embody what they're trying to argue for, right? So when you saw the Occupy movement saying, we want to be a little less hierarchical here, right? Can we distribute the power? They didn't bring sound systems to their things, right? They did the human microphone. I don't know if all of you know about that, but they would have no sound system and they'd have, 500 people. And so the person who was in the middle speaking would say the thing they wanted to say, and everybody else around them would say the thing they wanted to say. And then those people around them would turn around and say the thing they wanted to say. And all 500 people would get the message. And then they'd say the next line and they'd go out and out and out. That's a prefigurative movement. We could argue about how effective that is, what the cost of it is, but it's a wise thing to do. In my estimation, I think to live into the thing that you're trying to argue for, to demonstrate that it's possible, is a real gift. My favorite experiment with that, if you click once more. Getting ahead of myself. I want to define the word activist. One who believes in taking action, any action in the face of a problem, rather than being passive and doing nothing. Activism and protest are not synonymous. Sometimes the most effective activism isn't about opposing what's wrong, but rather creating and nourishing what's right. So once more, if I could spell it like this, I would. With the hyphen there, it makes it so much clearer, doesn't it? All right, one more. This is a band I was in for 10 years, and we're still kind of a band, but we're not touring these days. We're still writing songs. It's called Abraham Jam. That's Billy Jonas and Dawood Warnsby and me. And when people ask me what my faith tradition is, I tell them I'm a Quakertarian. I got a foot in the Presbyterian tradition and a foot in the Quaker tradition. Billy is Jewish, he's over there, and Dawood in the middle is Muslim. So we had a band and we called it Abraham Jam. And part of what we were arguing for is the idea that harmony can be more powerful than unity. And if you're a musician, you know that unison singing, that's when everybody's singing the same note. And harmony is when we're singing different notes that are beautiful together. We tune them to each other. So we were trying to be a prefigurative movement, right? To say, hey, I see what's happening between Christians and Jews and Muslims in the world. It could be like this. We'll show you. Here's one way that it could be. So I want to emphasize that strategy is really important, right? It's sometimes good just to all show up. I don't think last night's protests at the Edwards thing were organized at all. There was one guy from the ACLU who had a speaker and a mic, but he hadn't lined up any speakers. He just had a line. Anybody who wants to say something, come on. I brought a drum, and there was a guy that I ran into who was really good at calling out chants. So I was backing him up while he called out chants. But it just kind of happened. That's very different, of course, from the white flower story, which was incredibly well organized. I want to tell you a story about an experiment with activism that I was a part of. And I want to say this advisedly because I tend to be skeptical of people who are the hero of their own stories. I want to tell you a story about when I got it right one time, but I don't want you to believe that I did that because I was super wise or anything. I'm not trying to convince you of that. I had really good advisors around me who were showing me how to do this. I had 1 year of my life when I had a boss. Most of my life I've been a singer-songwriter and self-employed, and I write books and talk to people about it. But 1 year after I did a master's degree in peace and conflict resolution, I worked for the North Carolina Council of Churches. And it was really a joy to be there. There were 7 people on staff. All of them were smart, and all of them were funny, and all of them were deeply engaged in making the world a better place. I could not have asked for a better situation. And I learned a great deal in that year. One of the things that happened was that the Moral Monday movement, which has already been referenced, that Reverend Barber was leading, William Barber, was coming to fruition at that time. It was really just rising up. There had been for years before a group called HK which was a movement of movements. There were, when I joined, when the North Carolina Council of Churches was a part of that, and I was their liaison to the movement, I think there were like 87 organizations, and it got over 100 while I was there. But that year, we started to really take some action and dig into some civil disobedience. One of the things we did was we rented out the auditorium in the state legislature. You can rent that. Organizations can rent the little auditorium there. And we did. I don't know if you have to be a nonprofit or not, but anyway, we rented it and we had a little presentation there, and folks gave some speeches and we sang some songs, and it was all quite lovely. And then when it was over, we had talked about this possible strategy of not leaving, right? Of just occupying that space. And then it would be their move, and they could either arrest us or they could let us sleep there for the night, depending on how they wanted to amplify the situation. And so before I went down there, I wrote a blog, not on my website, but on the North Carolina Council of Churches website. And I didn't publish it. It was just sitting there waiting to be clicked and published. I got sign off from the director of the North Carolina Council of Churches. He took it to the board. We got sign off from the board. And I kind of went to do this civil disobedience on behalf of the North Carolina Council of Churches, which was a pretty neat thing to have in my wake behind me as I did that. So we were weighing out different possibilities. And in the end, they decided we weren't going to occupy the legislature. What we were going to do is go interrupt the proceedings, because terrible things were happening on the floor of the state legislature. Tom Tillis was the speaker at the time, and he was at the podium, and we all filled the balcony. And there was 100 and some of us, 150 maybe. And Reverend Barber had a question for Tom Tillis. He said, "Speaker Tillis, I've tried to get a meeting with you, but you have not responded to give me a meeting. There will be order in the chambers. The gentleman will be removed. He cannot keep peace." Be order in the chambers. Speaker Tillis, I have a question for you. You haven't made time for me, but I have a question for you. There will be order. Speaker Tillis, what does the Lord require of you? The gentleman will be removed. Speaker Tillis, what does the Lord require of you? And I had never realized that Micah was an organizer. But it turns out that the answer to that question makes a really good chant. And there we all were in the balcony saying, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. 150 people doing that, actually 149, because I wasn't doing it because I was shooting video. That was my job that day. And you know that if you chant while you're up against the video camera, all anybody hears is your own voice, right? So I wasn't doing that. I was quiet. I was taking video. The Capitol Police come in and they start pulling people out, and most people go outside. But 6 people don't. It's Reverend Barber and Kojo Nantambu and Rob Stevens, excuse me. There were several of us. I was not among the 6, but they were taken to the back room. And I went to the police officer that was guarding the door and I said, may I speak to my friends? And he said, if you want to join them. And I said, yes, I'd like that. Thank you. And so I went in there too, and they arrested me too. I didn't actually say I wanted to get arrested, but you know, I just said I want to talk to my friends. And he said I could join them. That seemed polite. At any rate, they arrested all 7 of us. And in the moment that we got arrested, I wrote to my colleague, Chris Lubiers at the North Carolina Council of Churches, and I texted him really quickly, and he was there on call waiting to publish one of 2 blogs that were almost perfectly similar, except for the title mostly. And one of them was called Why I Am Sleeping at the Legislature Tonight. And one of them was called Why I Am in Jail. And I said, Chris, publish the jail one. And he did, right before they took away my phone. So, because Reverend Barber is kind of a big deal, the media responded very quickly to the fact that he had been arrested in the legislature. This was before the Moral Monday movement, so it wasn't a normal thing to have happen. And it surprised everybody. It also surprised everybody that I was in jail, because I had never been in jail before. And people who listen to my music and feel some connection through that were quite shocked that I was in jail, and they wanted to know why I was in jail, which was the whole point. People are busy. It's hard to pay attention to what's going on in the state legislature. But so much depends on what's happening in the state legislature. And we wanted to call attention to about 5 things that were happening in the state legislature, including an effort to repeal the Racial Justice Act, which said that if you had been convicted and sentenced to death and could show evidence of racial discrimination in your conviction, then that could come back to trial and could be commuted to life in prison. It didn't say you could go free. It said death to life if you have hard evidence of racial discrimination. And they were trying to repeal that. That was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I was like, yep, I'm going to jail. That's not okay. So the media saw that Reverend Barber was arrested, and they did the first thing the media does. They searched to see what had already been published about what's happening in the legislature. And the only thing they found was my blog. And my blog, which laid out the reasons, political and theological, for why we were doing what we were doing, and laid out the things that were happening in the legislature that we took issue with, was quoted in every article that came out about Reverend Barber's arrest. And also, while I was in jail, people were already reading why I was there. They didn't have to wait till I came out and could explain it to them, right? So we did the pre-work, and that worked out pretty well. And the 7 of us were just in jail overnight. And it was not like I was arrested a few months later as part of the Moral Monday movement. That was a pretty administrative arrest. But this first one was the real thing. Strip search, dress orange. Actually, would you click our lawyer snuck the camera in. So that's me in jail. It was a pretty deep experience for me. Partly because of my incredible privilege in life, that this is not normal for me, which it's very normal for some people, with very little provocation or none. For me, it was really disturbing. I didn't sleep well for about 3 nights, didn't sleep much at all for about 3 nights. Wasn't able to be present to any conversation. I realized I wasn't okay when I was talking to my wife in the kitchen the next day, and I went and poured myself a glass of water and I set it down on the table, and then I went to the cabinet and got a glass and poured a glass of water and came back to the table, and there was already a glass of water there. And it was like, "Whew, I'm not here at all. I'm just not here." And I wasn't, right? So, but this point is not about me. The point is about strategy, right? What you want to do is get the word out. So how are you going to do that? What's going to get people's attention? And once you have it, what are you going to say to them and how? Raging grannies, such a good example of that. They get the attention and then they get their message across. We're about done, friends. It's 11:22. I've got 8 minutes left. I want to introduce you to one more thing if you're not familiar with it. Would you click that next slide? As we think about creative activism, creative nonviolence, civil action, I find this to be a super useful tool. How many of you have encountered the spectrum of allies? Okay, so some of you, but most not. Let me tell you a little bit about this. So this is a way to plot out the playing field when you're working on an issue, and also to consider, if you take a particular action, what effect might it have? We can't know for sure, but what effect might it have? So what we've got here, we're going to reduce the issue, our imaginary issue, to a binary, for and against. Most issues are not that simple, but let's just say it's for and against. So over here on that line that sticks out in the middle in this direction, we've got the active leaders of the allies, right? These are the leaders of the allies. They're on that line. In that pie slice are people who are working on that issue and they are actively engaged. In the next pie slice are people who are on your side, but they're not doing anything, right? They believe in what you're doing, but they're not engaged. The next people either don't know anything about the issue or they really don't care, right? They're neutral in the middle. The next slice are the people who are unsympathetic to your cause, but they're not engaged with the opposition. The next slice is people who are engaged with the opposition. And then right on the line are the leaders. We tend to think about getting those leaders together to talk. That's never going to work, friends. What actually works is adjacent pie slices talking to each other. And your goal in the movement is to slide everybody over one pie slice, right? If you can plant enough doubt among the active opposition that they become passive opposition, that's a win. If you can get the passive opposition to become neutral because there's some cognitive dissonance there, great. If you can get the neutral people educated and get them over into passive allies, that's a win. If you can get the passive allies to be active, that's a big win. And honestly, that's where I spend most of my life, is with really good-hearted people saying, hey, if you want to do something, here's how you start. I really love to get to do that work. Yeah. So that's the spectrum of allies. And what you do when you're planning a particular action, if you say, okay, I'm going to go chain myself to the courthouse steps, who is going to react how? And you can take all the stakeholders in this issue that you're aware of and actually write them in, plot them on that spectrum of allies. Put a little line and see where they are, right? And then say, okay, if I do this, who's going to react how? Because sometimes you're just going to motivate the opposition, right? How do I get the message across that complicates their view of things if I think their view is really misguided? You see where I'm going with this, right? So that's the spectrum of allies. I find it to be an extremely useful tool. I just wanted to briefly introduce you to it. The last thing I've got to share before we just open the floor for just the last few minutes here. There's a researcher named Erica Chenoweth who's written a lot about nonviolent resistance around the world. And she's a fascinating person. I've been tracking her for about 20 years. And she's just really wise. I really respect her. Chenoweth says that there are 4 factors that she has observed in successful nonviolent actions around the world, especially trying to overthrow repressive governments. She said they have four things in common. One is that they are large and diverse. So you're aiming for the middle, trying to welcome people the more you can. I actually, while I was chanting with the guy last night that I told you about, he started a chant that I said, that's going to push some people away. And I said, man, let's lean away from that one. And he's like, okay. So we didn't do that one. And I'm really glad we didn't, because it would have carved some people off, right? So aim for the middle. Large and diverse, give opportunities for participation. Chenoweth says that she has almost never seen a revolution fail when 3.5% of the population is visibly engaged. When she hits 3.5% of the population that are engaged in Tahrir Square, we saw that, right? When you get to 3.5, that they almost always win. And according to her research, the nonviolent revolutions are more than twice as successful as the violent ones. They have a better record by far of actually establishing a new government and being able to move forward. That's pretty amazing to me. The second one is that people work to shift I'm gonna try again, take two. Shift loyalties within the pillars of support. So if you have an oppressive regime of some sort, a man named George Lakey developed some really interesting work based on Gene Sharp's work. He says, you know, we think about power as being, there are powerful people at the top, it's a pyramid, and then there are lots of people at the bottom who have less power, but if they get together, they can have power to push on the top. He said, really, you gotta flip that upside down, because these regimes are much more precarious than you realize. So you put that pyramid upside down, you've got these sticks holding it up, right? And those sticks are banks, business people, military, schools, media, bureaucracy, police, judiciary, communities of faith. If you can start infiltrating each of those, if you can start turning each of those to your side, if you pull out those supports, you can maybe pull out 2 or 3 of them and it might still stand. But you hit a point where it goes right over. All of this deserves a much deeper dive than we're giving it today, but just a brief mention of this. The third factor is a wide variety of creative tactics. And that's what we came here to talk about this morning, right? Wide variety of creative tactics. Don't just go to the old playbook. Come up with new things. And the fourth is discipline and resistance in the face of oppression. So y'all, we need to be doing training. There are good folks out there who do training in nonviolent resistance. I'm a big fan of an organization called Training for Change, but there are many out there. Draw on your hive, draw on your communities, get together some trainings, yeah? The more prepared we are, the better the work is going to be. I'm again greatly moved by your time, and I've left no time at all for questions, and I hate that because I'd really like to hear what you have to say. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of a benediction. This is not exactly a religious crowd. Sorry. Oh, that's awesome. Q&A then. That's so perfect. See, every time I speak to any group, they should do that. They should tell me that it's 15 minutes, stops 15 minutes before. That's perfect. All right. I wrote down in my notes 57 minutes. That's what I wrote down. So yeah. I think they were just trying to indicate general motion. There should be an arrow from each of those to the next. I think they were just trying to say the whole thing goes this way. Right, so they were pretty random arrows. Well, that's certainly true, but never do I want to give up on a whole pie slice, right? Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, I'm not the expert either. And I'd have no corner on the wisdom in the room for sure. So, and with that in mind, thank you. With that in mind, these don't have to be questions. They can be statements. Anything you want to throw in?
Recent training on activism, resistance was explained, it was intentional, like, we need to put our efforts where we can some change, so you know, right, anyone up, if you're really working hard, you're all maybe not see as much what you could have when it.
Yeah, okay, I very much appreciate that. So it is important to figure out where is those high slides that you have in, right? And maybe you are really connected to people in that active slides, but probably most of us are not. Deeply connected to folks in the active opposition. So you need to figure out where your influence is going to be actually not wasted effort, but useful. Thank you for that.
Thanks. You may have hit this at the beginning while I was running around checking on all the groups. Because I was involved in sort of the next wave that really was the Moral Monday movement, where that kind of extended over a summer. I'm wondering if you can speak to one of the things that I heard Reverend Barber talking about quite a bit during that time. One was people of faith claiming a voice from within their tradition in the public sphere. And also, I was struck in the first time I was arrested in that movement that it was almost all educators, nurses, clergy, and retirees. And so there was a really interesting disruption by who was mobilized. And if you might speak to some of the role of that. And I think specific, I know you mentioned the grannies, but if specifically the role of, yeah, I think you got where the direction of the question's going. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian. Right on. I think you're getting at something that's extremely important to think about. One is that there are those of us who are in positions where we can go get arrested and not lose our jobs, right? My boss is a little bit of a jerk, but he mostly lets me do stuff like that, right? Because he's me. So there are retirees, right? That you're probably not going to lose your job over going to do this. Awesome. You're in a position of power there. That's amazing. If you're an educator with tenure, if you're a doctor with private practice, et cetera, you've got some latitude to do this. And what's important to think about for me in that particular scenario is that those of us who are in less danger have more obligation to stand up, right? Folks who are marginalized and are in direct danger, I'm not actually asking them to do this work unless they feel called to do that work. Because that's super dangerous. And those of us who have a little more, look, I was dealt the whole hand of traditional privilege cards, every one of them. That doesn't make me a good person. It doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me ignorant, right? I have to learn from folks who are marginalized because it's really hard to see the system from the middle of the system, right? So I have to put extra effort into learning. And I'm still doing that because I know there's still stuff that I do not understand and that I get wrong. But part of the, well, Peter Parker's uncle said to him, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So when we have that extra power that's dealt to us by the society around us, we've got to be really intentional about spending.
Hi, I'll start with an observation because it troubled me. As you were talking about the shifting loyalties within pillars of support, when you named those pillars, I can't remember them all, but it was things like bankers, police, security forces, military, different things like that. And then you listed churches, and rather than make me feel good as a pastor, that made me feel sad that the kinds of pillars of support for a regime that might need revolution. So and it was interesting because you're talking about this stuff, and I know you as an artist, first and foremost. I wonder if you can maybe name pillars that you find meaningful in these movements of an alternate regime. Maybe the regime that somebody like Jesus might have put in opposition to the regime supported by military and banks and financial systems and organized religion and all the other stuff. So yeah, feeling troubled by what you're sharing, but also wondering if there's a hopeful side of other pillars we can participate in and build up.
Yes, I share your discomfort. Right? Communities of faith have always been both, right? They've always been. We have bought into the power structures, we've sold out to the power structures, we've supported them, and we have been seeds of disruption, right? That both of those things are true simultaneously. And I do love what you're saying about what's the alternate power structure. It's an interesting thing to think about. I'm going to spend more time thinking about what those pillars might be. You've named certainly artists, right? That's a huge piece of this. We've seen that any medium of art can tell a powerful story. Any medium of art can tell a powerful story. So that's important. And I want to just speak to faith communities in particular, because there is an extremely deep body of work on the nonviolence of Jesus, right? And the radical things that he did in terms of the turn the other cheek. Walter Wink wrote eloquently about this. And then my friend Daniel Buttrey put out a whole manual about how to teach this. It was really fun. We got to go to Zambia, teach 180 Zambian Baptists together, nonviolence training. Super fun. But looking at those radical stories, I don't want to, that would take half hour to go deep into that. But I think it's really important to find the resources that are teaching that side of the story. Let me say this about churches, though, specifically. I've got an essay cooking in my head that I haven't written out yet about politics and religion. And this is the heart of it. That we use the word politics in two really different ways. And often in the same conversation, we weave between the two definitions without realizing that we've switched. And it's really important that we delineate which definition of politics we're talking about. One is the mud fight between political parties. I win when you lose, right? That. But the deeper definition of the word politics is any decision by which a group of people, any means by which a group of people makes decisions about what matters and who matters, right? Any means by which a group of people makes decisions together about what matters and who matters. And what's strange about that conversation with churches is that there are these two diametrically opposed ideas here, depending on which definition of politics you're using. Churches absolutely should not be involved in partisan politics, saying, yeah, vote for this party and not that party. Not okay. But if churches can't speak to the values that they represent, which is that second definition of politics, then they are not being faithful. And I say churches, I really mean communities of faith, right? You can't fail to talk about politics and be faithful if your faith has anything at all to do with a particular set of values, right? So it's ironic to me, or interesting at any rate, that we absolutely must not talk about politics by one definition, and we absolutely must talk about politics by the other. Yeah.
Can you hear me? I will use that for the things. Thank you so much. So I wasn't going to ask a question, but now I'm taken by this observation that you make, right? Because I don't know about that, but I'm really taken by two things you've said. That this is you've used the word values, which tells me that part of what it means to be active is to be driven by a set of values that activate me, right? And so you talked about Occupy and its own need to recognize that the values in the resistance were getting in the way of the outcomes of the resistance. If we're gonna try to liberate us by being, I don't know, sexist, then that kind of undermines your project of some kind of democratic decision-making, so you have to interrupt it, right? And but this last thing that you said has me thinking about formation for this work. And you talked about a little bit ago about how your experience of being in jail was something that was outering, right? That it was decentering, like you were not present to yourself. And I do wonder, because my work is about race, I wonder about your observations around what is the reformation of the kind of identity reshaping that has to happen as people are thinking about becoming active in. What is the thing that has to be out there then? Because I think that if I go to be active, but I haven't reimagined or reconfigured my own formation, I will bring into that active space the thing that does things with me, right? I will become the sabotage of my own path for liberation. And so what have you learned about the reformation you had to do, white, privileged, cisgender person, to move into this other way of being? So that's my question for you.
Yeah, so I would say I can't talk about that reformation in the past tense. It's very much ongoing, right? I've got a long way to go, right? What's that? Sorry. Well, but also, I mean, speaking from this particular social location, I need to not think I've got it figured out, right? That's really important for me to own some humility in this conversation. So let me land on the last thing you said, because this is something that you asked what I've learned. One of the things I've learned is that the inner journey and the outer journey have to mirror each other. But you can't expect perfection on either end, right? So I have seen peacemakers, you have too, and I'm pretty sure, folks who self-identify as peacemakers who throw shrapnel in every room they go into, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've met that person, right? So it's important to do the inner work, yes. But it troubles me when I hear people say, well, first you have to find peace within your own heart, and then you go work for peace in the world. Because you know, if you wait till you are self-actualized and you've got peace, you're gonna wait forever, and that's a great reason not to do anything at all, right? So we have to bring our whole imperfection to this work, and it's messy work, right? It's messy work. I say the wrong thing a lot of the time. It breaks my heart that I misgendered somebody last night at the protest. I hate doing that. I don't want to hurt anybody. But sometimes you do stupid stuff, right? And so you course correct and you learn and you try to remember for next time. I'm trying to remember, based on my experience last night, I said, my brothers, I gotta run. And I shouldn't have said my brothers. I should have said my family. So on my way home in the car, I was going, my family, my family, my family, my family. So it's right there for me next time when I need it, right? My family, I gotta run. So I would say one thing, yes, do the inside work, right? That is part of it. And two, don't wait till you've got it figured out, because nobody's got it figured out. And we need you in all your beautiful imperfection, right? So that's where we're at. Let's have one more slide. I'm gonna close up here. I use that phrase a lot. And it's well, arguably laughable, because people do laugh when you say that, right? If you run into somebody later on, say on Tuesday when you're back in town, you swing by the grocery store and somebody says, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Well, I went to this conference. Yeah, well, it's about a lot of stuff. I heard this one guy talk about changing the world. Exactly, that's what people do, right? They laugh. Because it sounds super naive, like, who do you think you are? It's a big old world, you're just you. What are you thinking? But again, the semantics matter here. How we're using words, because I think we generally equate change and fix. So change the world, save the world, fix the world, use those interchangeably, and they do.
I already have confidence.